Turning now to the international newspapers, Laurent Berchtaker joins us for a look at that. And Laurent, I'm going to start here in France, where, of course, everybody is talking about this renewed lockdown.
Well, it was a much anticipated and predictable announcement, but that hasn't stopped the French papers from being highly critical of this decision. Let's take a look at Le Figaro, which opens with this simple headline on the front page: Reconfiné, confined again. And in a scathing editorial published on its website, the newspaper asks what was it all for, referring to that first months-long lockdown. And we now seem to be back at square one. The author calls lockdowns in general a practice from the Middle Ages and the most expensive and destructive sanitary tool, not only because, well, not at all because people will be bored and stay at home, but mostly because of the thousands who will lose their jobs or their businesses as a result. Le Figaro says this was partly due to the government's failure to prepare adequately for this second wave, but also blames the French people, and especially the young, who seem to let go of all their precautions as soon as the first lockdown was lifted. Now moving on to Libération, another French newspaper, which also headlines on the lockdown with a picture of multiple Emmanuel Macrons, as if seen through a kaleidoscope, with this caption, Un jour sans fin, a day that never ends, which is also the French title for the movie Groundhog Day. Well, and this impression of déjà vu can be seen in all the French newspapers. And we have this cartoon by Plantu published in Le Monde, showing people watching Macron's speech on TV and complaining about having already seen this episode.
Criticism there, you're saying, Laurent, for the lack of preparation. Are any papers feeling that France is still, nonetheless, in perhaps a slightly better place than it was the last time around?
Well, that's a question asked by Libération in this article, where it analyzes the preparedness of public services in this crisis. And while public transit seems better prepared in general than it was the first time around, with workers now having better equipment and legal protection if they feel sick to take off days from work, the author warns that's not the case for schools, where teachers have been warning for at least almost 2 months now that they're not sufficiently equipped, that they don't have the conditions to face this pandemic. They denounce overcrowded classes, inadequate distancing measures, and, well, a lack of equipment. And some teachers' unions are even threatening to go on strike, saying they refuse to be sacrificed by the government.
Let's move across to Germany now. Laurent, lockdown measures also being put in place there. How are German papers reacting to that?
Well, the country had so far fared better than some of its European neighbors, but there was a sense that this lockdown was unavoidable in the end. And according to Der Spiegel, a German newspaper, a majority of the German population, around 60%, sees it as a necessary step. The article does, however, note that Germans are growing increasingly dissatisfied with Angela Merkel's response to the crisis, especially the conservatives and the far right, who have already staged several protests. Now, taking a look at another German newspaper, the tabloid Bild is critical of this government's response and is calling on Merkel to change strategy now. Now, the article is not arguing against the lockdown itself, but urges the government to do more to protect vulnerable people, essentially the elderly, and rather than to isolate them, for instance, by providing free generalized testing, clear sanitary guidelines in multiple languages. And finally, for Deutsche Welle, Germans must brace for a dark and quiet November and will need to show the best democratic virtue there is, according to the author, public spirit, to get through the winter.
Finally, Laurent, over in China, you've spotted an unusual story about a man being arrested for throwing away money.
Well, that's right. It's quite an unusual one indeed. And as we can see with this Guardian headline, the man wasn't simply throwing money. He was actually showering commuters from a 30th floor window. Now, the article quotes local media, which reported a heavenly rain of banknotes from the sky. And this, of course, caused a massive commotion, completely halting traffic as people left their cars to cash the bills. Now, the man was arrested not because throwing money is illegal in China, but because he was apparently extremely high on drugs, and specifically, quoting The Guardian, in an amphetamine-induced trance. Well, and this is apparently not an isolated incident in China. The Guardian cites at least 2 other recent examples of people throwing money out in the streets because they were having a bad day.
Okay, having a bad day throwing money away. Makes sense to me, Laurent. Thanks a lot for a look at the international papers.
Thank you.
As we're going to have to take a quick break, but we're back with all the latest updates in just a few minutes, so do stay with us.